whenever Daniel Hannan writes for something for Conservative Home, you know that it's going to be a good comedy time for all of us. Because the only reason Daniel Hannan ends up in Conservative Home is because the other right-wing media outlets are a bit like, maybe not this time, Dan. Maybe not this time. We're not ready really for your fantastic ideas. Our audience just would not be able to comprehend your genius, galaxy-sized brain. Tell you what, go to Conservative Home. There's your audience. There's your lovely audience that you've got. Pass on your wisdom to them, and I'm sure they will come to absolutely appreciate it. Bear in mind, in the comments, as we always do, there are a couple of comments that call out, of course, Daniel Hannan on his nonsense. And bear in mind, Daniel Hannan, sometimes very active in the comments section. After his article goes up, Daniel Hannan sometimes will respond. In this article, Daniel Hannan nowhere to be seen, because even he knows he doesn't want to talk about the reality of what this does, because oh my word, this is some proper Brexit fantasies we are seeing right now at the moment. So before, of course, we get into the comedy stylings of Daniel Hannan, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link where you can, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let us crack on into this, because this is just too good not to share, to be honest. So over we go to Conservative Home with Daniel Hannan, the Pacific Partnership, not the CPTPP. There's too many P's in that for me. I just call it the Pacific Partnership. Miles easier to call it that. Paves the way for an American trade deal, and Labour should now seize the chance. Once again, Conservatives, as they will be, I can guarantee you, for as long as Trump is in that White House, they are going to talk up saying, you need to go get the American trade deal. You should go get the American trade deal. You should go get the American trade deal. Meanwhile, of course, they went during the Trump years to get a trade deal, and they've never shown it. They've never shown it, because they know just how bad a trade deal under Trump would be. Not only would it destroy American farming, it would give us all that chlorinated chicken, which we know the British public does not want. It would make the NHS be forced to buy drugs at American prices, not our, department in there called NICE, which goes and, is organized to sort of buy drugs at a better price. So it negotiates sort of with the drug and manufacturing companies. No, we would be forced to buy at American prices. And that would mean the NHS having to spend hundreds of millions of extra pounds just on the cost of these. And that will be, again, disastrous on all the reasons. And that's just the scratching the surface, I think, of some of this stuff, of what would be in this trade deal. Remember, Trump's in the White House, Republicans are in the Senate and the House. Yeah. We should not be doing a trade deal with America at all. No way. That way lies madness. And of course, we've got the madman himself, Daniel Hannan, advocating for this now as well. So, on Sunday, the United Kingdom became the first new country to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, bringing the members to 12. Of course, we should also remind you We are the first country to join that, I believe, um, basically since its founding, since its conception. Um, no other country has joined since its conception. No one is queuing up to join it because the whole thing, and we'll get into this later, the whole thing, why it was created, was to be an economic counterbalance to China. They wanted to try and control the growing economic influence of China in that region. So the Japanese, along with the Americans at the time, came up with the idea to create this. This was going to be very much based on the European single market. And the whole idea was to try and keep China out of it. However, they realized that now with America gone, there are a lot of countries that were actually, you know, quite like doing business with China, quite liked, all that growth that they were getting in the Asia Pacific, mostly driven by Chinese demand, as we'll be getting into later as well. And they realized, oh, we actually need someone that can balance this out. And of course, along we came saying, we'd like to join, to which Japan went, get them in. Just get them in. We don't give a damn. Just get them in so that they can say no to China if they come calling. That's the only reason we are in the Pacific Partnership. So, anyway, Daniel continues. The Europhile commentators have, of course, played down the story. It's not even worth mentioning. It's gives us nothing in the long term, but you will, I suppose, have the opportunity to big up this. And of course, he's about to exemplify the very tenets of free market fundamentalism here, once again, as Daniel Hannan is. So, because, of course, they cannot admit that anything good has come out of Brexit. Again, is this going to be good? Not really, especially when you look into those, secret courts that are baked in to that, to that Pacific Partnership. But the implications, both economic and strategic, are huge. As well as boosting GDP, our membership will promote an approach to regulation superior to the EU's, pave the way, of course, to deal with the United States and strengthen the free world against Chinese revanchinism. Right. It boosts our GDP by less than 1%. It's 0.08%. That is nothing. Nothing. It boosts nothing. Right? Boosts nothing. It does not come near to approaching a superior regulatory system than the EU's. Because what happens, again, as we mentioned, the secret courts, if, let's say, Canada, who has been one of our biggest blockers in paving the way for this, of us joining, turns around and goes, yeah, we want more access to your market for our meat products, which they've already expressed this already, they will take us to court. But bear in mind, our regulations don't allow for their hormone grown beef, lamb, etc. They do not meet our animal standards. Well, because they currently don't, what will happen is Canada, or at least their farmers union and organization, will take the UK to one of these secret courts, which they will win because these secret courts are not based on, a country's sovereignty. What they will do, and then what will happen is they will win in this court, and we will be forced to accept those lower standards. So even though we are up here and Canada's meat coming in might be down here, we have to accept it. Like it or not, we now have to accept it. And that will be a huge, huge disjoint to farmers. Huge blow to farmers. Huge blow. Now, you might be saying, Why have Labour gone through with this? Well, as I speculated at the time, it was already so far along that it just wasn't worth cancelling. And bear in mind, to leave the Pacific Partnership, you only need to give 6 months' notice. Like that is it. We just have to give 6 months' notice and we leave. This isn't like leaving the EU. It's 6 month notice. We leave. That's it. So it is a lot easier to leave. But it's not, of course, going to pave the way for a United States deal. There is no evidence to suggest this is, of course, the long-held belief on Brexiteers that we will gain this free, wonderful free trade deal with America. To again quote Daniel Hannan from Brexit the movie, who said that getting a free trade deal with America will make staying in the single market and customs union seem ridiculous. And of course, strengthen the free world against Chinese revisionism. How? How does us joining an economic bloc do this? This isn't a military bloc. We're not joining OTAN, which is like Pacific NATO. We're not joining that. In fact, are we already members of OTAN? I can't remember now, but yeah, that someone will tell me, I'm sure, in the chat. But yeah, like I say, we are there in this to say no to China. So I suppose if he's referring to that, then maybe he has a point on that. But as you can tell already straight away, even then just like the second paragraph, we've had to explain copiously why he's wrong on that. So back to this. So he continues with, let's start with the most basic case for membership. The Pacific Partnership, unlike the EU, is growing. Its members include Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, Peru, and Chile. They have an average 8% growth this century to the EU's 1.7%. So let's actually, no, we'll continue on to the next one before I respond. Yes, he says the EU was, of course, bigger to begin with, accounting for a larger share of the world's economy. Through Britain's now switch does bring the two groups close to parity. And of course, the Pacific Partnership will overtake the European bloc in the next couple of years. Will it? I don't think it will. That's, of course, Daniel Hannan saying, oh, there, this bloc is growing. This bloc is growing. Look at it. It's grown 8%. Meanwhile, you look at those countries. Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, Peru, and Chile. Well, in terms of economic advanced economies, there is only Australia and Japan there. Singapore, Malaysia, Peru, and Chile are not counted as advanced economies. They are counted as growing economies or developing economies. They are developing their economies. So, of course, because they are developing their economies, line goes up. Not only that, what Daniel Hannan doesn't mention, especially Australia, their growth pretty much powered by China, because China is buying their coal, their minerals. Australia just discovered a massive oil deposit right in the center of Australia, so that's going to drive a lot of their growth. Singapore, of course, gets a lot of its growth purely because of its strategic location of where it is. It is a massive port. Again, it's location for Singapore. Malaysia, again, happens to be in the right area. It is a developing economy. There you go. Japan, meanwhile, funny that, you know, Daniel Hannan would criticize the EU for not having a, quote, growing economy. But Japan's economy, really since the 1990s, has struggled astronomically to have any growth. Really struggle. In fact, they are going to have even more troubles because they are going to be dealing with a very big demographic crisis in the next couple of years, which is going to massively affect their growth. And then you get Peru and Chile. Again, just like, they're in, the, South America, developing economies. China is very, very interested in a lot of their mineral deposits, and that again is what is driving their growth. For a bloc that was meant to be an economic blocker, or at least a counterbalance to China, there are sure a lot of countries that are, growing because of China. And again, that is why we have been invited to this, because they want us there so that we can say no to China should they try and join this. However, again, there's no evidence that they might, but there's also no evidence to say that they might not decide to, put forward an application to join. So, continues with this. So, Europe's prosperity is a fading memory. Oof. Again, Europe's prosperity. It is a massive economy. Europe is a massive economy, but because line don't go up, in Daniel Hannan's imagination in mind, with his free market fundamentalist ideology, as far as he is concerned, and this would apply to any business, it might be a really big, multinational, successful business, but because line don't go up, Daniel Hannan would consider that a dead company. But employs 100,000 people, makes profit every year, but line don't go up, or you're not making enough, quote, growth here, you're a dead company. Anyway, Mario Draghi's over 400-page report into, of course, European competitiveness found that low growth was, quote, an existential challenge to the continent. As the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni put it, America innovates, China replicates, and Europe regulates. And Europe is referred to as a regulatory superpower, which, if you really do pay any attention to businesses or anything like that, gives companies the opportunity to innovate because of those regulations. Oh, we can't do that anymore. Well, let's find new ways. Let's look at new ways we can do that and work within those regulations. So Giorgia Meloni, wrong on that for starters. Again, I think quite probably an out of context quote from her. It would be interesting to see what she said before and after that quote, but of course, it's Daniel Hannan. There you go. So the EU made unenforced errors, he continues with. First of all, adopting the euro. Adopting the euro. Oh, the Brexiteers' bane. Right? The euro, every single time, has proved its critics wrong. It has survived 3 crises, I think, that, again, according to people like Daniel Nann, should have killed off the euro. It survived. It's doing pretty well. Then, of course, Daniel Hannan doesn't really want to admit that the euro is actually doing pretty well. It's, again, a growing currency. Not growing in leaps and bounds. It's slow growth, but it's slow and steady growth. And it is growth that is built on very stable economic foundations because it is slow and steady growth. Then, of course, Daniel Hannan, free market fundamentalist, can't have that. Can't have that. Like I say, contradicts his entire ideological output. And of course, concentrating, of course, its energy output to policy to cultists. I'm sure he disagrees with the Europeans' move to net zero. That will again open up huge amounts of industries. And of course, what would happen, let's say in 30 years' time, where the EU has made this transition to net zero, has got all these, green energy products out, then what? And what if all that proves to be a massive success, which every single economist is saying it's going to be a big, massive success. It's going to be a big driver for growth. And where are we? We're left horribly in the dust, having to spend decades trying to catch up. Luckily, we've got a government that actually gives a damn about that. And we are, thanks to Rishi Sunak, after literally shooting the entire thing in the foot, we are now back on track. We're behind, but we are at least back on track a bit. But even if they were run by so many Thatchers and Reagans, it would still face the problem of demography. The median age is, of course, 45, and in the Pacific Partnership, it is 36. So if they've got a larger population, and they've got population growth because of, again, medium age, why is that an issue? If we've got an aging population, that surely means immigration to Europe is going to be a good thing, so you can bring that down. And not in favor of immigration. Again, it's funny because that clearly, what he just said there, makes the case for immigration. But Daniel Hannan, not in favor of immigration. The EU, of course, unlike the Pacific Partnership, is already, of course, struggling to support increasing numbers of pensioners with fewer and fewer workers. Again, what about Japan? Like that entire argument there applies to Japan. Is Daniel Hannan just going to ignore Japan? Again, it's part of the Pacific Partnership. I thought this was all wonderful. But again, he likes information, supports his argument. Anything that doesn't, ignored. But he continues. We live in an age, of course, where is now mass, of course, statistical data, allowing both sides for any debate to cherry pick. Sure enough, the Euro nostalgist will point to a 4-year-old study claiming that the Pacific Partner membership would only boost our economy by only 1.8 billion. Remember, that's 0.08%. That's the study, of course, he's responding to. Bear in mind, everyone cites that, everyone quotes that, because it is a good study. Daniel Hannan believes otherwise. Maybe he should go and fund his own study. Fund his own independent study, see what they find. And I love it because he immediately turned around and said, this was an obviously flawed piece of work. Where's your evidence that it was a flawed piece of work? And of course, it has since been superseded by what? I don't see you citing any sources for there in that. It ignored, of course, many other things, the way trade deals encourage businesses to behave very differently, and of course, possibly the possibility that the Pacific Partnership might expand. Really, who's queuing up to join the Pacific Partnership? There aren't any other countries willing to join. So among these other countries that have either officially applied, again, no one's officially applied, or signaled an interest in joining, which is really where he's being a bit, suspicious on that one, saying officially applied, are, of course, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea. And South Korea accessions alone would, of course, boost the economic benefits of the Pacific Partnership for Britain by 30%. How? Why would it suddenly boost the economic benefits by 30%? These countries all trade with each other more than they do us. We are buying from them. We are importing from them. We are not exporting to them. It is going to have a big monumental knock on our manufacturing sector. Should all those, countries join, like the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand. That's going to have a big knock-on effect for our industrial base here. That means less jobs here. Daniel Hannan understand that. I don't think he does, because of course he's a free market fundamentalist. He doesn't care about that. So we should see the Pacific Partnership as a welcome return to Britain's blue water foreign policy after the 12th century that was, for good reasons, about autonomously, now a wider sweep of things focused on Europe. He's obviously talking about after the Second World War, we did sort of the retreat from sort of the removal from the Pacific, basically. And of course, this was again fall of empire. I genuinely can't believe he is doling out. Oh God, remember when we were empire? Remember all that imperial nostalgia? I'm just like, what's he? Anyway, Disraeli, why are you quoting Disraeli? Disraeli liked to observe that Britain was as much an Asian as a European power. And one reason why other Pacific members were so keen to get us in. No. Okay, he's trying to sort of use imperial nostalgia as a reason why these countries wanted to get us in. Again, I remind you, as we said at the beginning, only reason we are there is to say no to China. Other countries and Japan that allowed us in do not care. We're going to probably be getting to a big tussle in a couple of years, well, with Canada over some of this stuff. So that'll be fun when that starts to get reported. But like I say, it'll all be kept secret and then it'll come out. And I think public opinion on the Pacific Partnership will turn pretty quickly after that. So the UNBO members, of course, were keen to get in after the US withdrew its application in 2016. Gee, who withdrew that application? Who withdrew that application in 2016? What happened in 2016 that caused the US to withdraw that application? There was also that they wanted, of course, nuclear power with a global naval reach. Only yesterday, the Australian Submarines Agency signalled a contract with BAE Systems to buy British nuclear-powered subs. Why wouldn't that have happened if we weren't in? Like, that would have probably happened anyway. Who's to say that wouldn't have happened if we weren't in the CPP? But oh well, there's only no evidence to say that. No evidence at all. Several people can, of course, take credit for our membership, including Liam Fox, who mooted the idea as Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, who made the application, and of course, by no means last, Kimmy Badnock, who got it over the line at the Pacific Partnership Mexico Summit, which, again, no one was really that enthralled by. These other countries don't really care that we're there, other than the fact, okay, you're here, you're not really in the Pacific, but sure, we guess. There's also tip our hats to Jonathan Reynolds, Badnock's successor, who instead of sneering at the achievement, as so many other Remainers feel obliged to, has celebrated the extension as part of Britain's growth strategy. Again, it's not going to really give us any growth. Reynolds probably has to do, he's not going to come out and just rubbish this. To be honest, he wasn't, why was he just going to come out and rubbish it? He had to say something about it. Just, he's pretty much obligated to, probably. Like I say, there was just no point cancelling this because we were just so far along at that point. Of course, he is right. Indeed, it may only be the thing that has happened, of course, since the election that will unambiguously, of course, increase Britain's GDP. Again, Daniel Hannan's going to have to prove that. He's going to have to prove that. It will not. It will not improve our GDP. It will not. If it does, it will be by a minuscule amount. Remember, 0.08%. That is nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's why Daniel Hannan had to put it in the in the pounds number to make it sound bigger. Because if you put it in the pounds number, it makes it sound bigger, where you realize what the actual percentage of it, where it's 0.08%. Again, nothing. However, one aspect, of course, of this has gone almost entirely wholly unreported. This makes a UK-US deal now logistically easier. Why? Why does it make it logistically easier? Donald Trump was, of course, elected on 2016 on the promise to scrap NAFTA. What about all those tariffs that he's promised as well? Once he got in, he realized that undoing a deal that covered at least a third of all US exports was a bad idea. So he saved face now to comply with his election pledge. He instead downgraded NAFTA significantly, replacing it in 2018 with the UNESCO, the US, Mexico, and Canada deal. But what was the difference, of course, between the two? UNESCO was a slightly less comprehensive deal through the thrust of NAFTA, though, was kept in place. The changes were, of course, largely adapted from the Pacific Partnership, which has been negotiated around US strategic interests and not in small measure by US officials up until 2016 election. That's a completely different trade deal. Okay, the Pacific Partnership was based on the success of the single market and customs union. Why aren't you mentioning that? As long as the US, of course, is in that, and Britain is in the Pacific Partnership, most of the commercial obligations the two states undertake, of course, are the same. The standards of the two organizations are remarkably similar. I mean, all those secret courts, etc. For the reason I described the Pacific Partnership model is superior to that of the EU is at first threefold. First, there is no associated political union because the Pacific Partnership is not a political union. Never was. It was not set out like that at all. So bringing that up, okay, but wasn't set up to do that. So there's no political union, no parliament, no currency, no criminal courts, no foreign embassies. Second, it is a free trade area and not a customs union. Yeah, which we're going to find out how much of a customs union that is in a while, where those secret courts come in. In other words, it does not prohibit members from signing trade deals with other countries. Yeah, it doesn't. But because of the way the single market is set up, and because of how big the EU is, it has a lot more power in trade deals. Thirdly, it's concerned, of course, largely with the standards of trade products rather than poking its nose into domestic issues. Yeah, lowering those standards of those traded products, need to say. So all the nonsense we've been listening to over the past 8 years about chlorinated chickens are just false. There is more chlorine in a bag of washed salad. But that is beside the point, except the British public really cares about that. And there will be health consequences because of that. I am pressing X to doubt about your bag of chlorine in a bag of washed salad. That's for sure. But that is beside the point. Since nothing in the USA or even the CPP could actually force a member state to admit such a product if it failed to meet domestic regulations. That is a lie. That right there is a lie. In the Pacific Partnership, Kimmy Badenoch, last year, where she was Trade Secretary, had to answer a question on this as to why she had to put aside a lot of money in case the UK was going to be sued in these secret courts that are fully part of the Pacific Partnership. That is a lie. And they will sue us because we have higher standards. Because we do not have higher standards, we are not letting those products in. If that happens, a company based in one of those countries can sue us. That is happening potentially next year or probably sooner with Canada. Thing is, we won't hear about it until after it happens. So, In an ideal world, the true trade organizations would merge. In other words, the US would join the Pacific Partnership, which was the original plan. Canada and Mexico are already members. And in 2018, Trump did express an interest in re engaging with the Pacific Nexus, provided it, quote, represented a substantially better deal for the United States. Guess what? That didn't happen. Why? Because Trump is like, if I don't get, 100% of what the United States demands, and it is not, unanimously in our favor, then we ain't signing that trade deal. Yeah, good luck with that. No other country is going to sort of agree with signing that trade deal. Also, might be the reason why, as we said before, the Conservatives are not very forthcoming about showing that UK-US trade deal that they supposedly had. But given the mood in Congress, to say nothing, of course, of Trump's threats of tariff against Canada and Mexico, I suspect that the bilateral US-UK free trade agreement is the only deal in town. The question is whether Labour will have the vision and patriotism to seize one. Patriotism doesn't even come into it. Oddly enough, I am optimistic. The party doesn't like the optics of doing a deal with Trump, and Brussels wants Britain to suffer any tariffs it faces in solidarity. Well, we're going to get caught in a trade war. And ultimately, as I've said before, those trade headwinds are going to blow us far more closely to Brussels than we are to the US. However, the potential gains will, I suspect, outweigh the distaste. Well, what about all the downsides? What about all that chlorinated chicken, the hormone beef, the stuff with the NHS, the secret courts, which the US wants all its trade deals to have in? So that it can sue us to have lower standards. What about that stuff? Thank you very much, Daniel Hannan. It plays its cards very wisely. Labour could obviously end up being the party that delivered what the Tories never did: a free trade both with the EU and the US. And of course, that will cause huge problems with the EU if that did as well. What about US products going into the UK via EU via the US? Again, huge problems there. So it might obviously persuade Trump to re-engage. Again, it won't. We would, of course, have to rename the Pacific Partnership, whose clunky name was a close chosen by Justin Trudeau, but we should do that anyway. And again, I agree with him. It is very clunky. I just call it the Pacific Partnership because it's easy. One more thing to consider, especially, of course, for the Secretary of State. He is reading, quote, is that the EU will eventually find a way of doing its own deal with the US. Yeah, they probably will do a deal with the EU at some point. That's inevitable. But they trade with each other already, to the EU and, the US. Inevitably, in the future, there will be some point of trade deal. However, it will take a long, long time because guess what? The US and the EU will be negotiating on equal terms because they are two very big markets. One more thing to consider. Hang on. So, so if Britain, of course, hangs back out of a combination of Europhile nostalgia and anti-Trumpery, it risks now being left when the music stops. Take the win, Labour. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Again, what would be in that US trade deal? We don't know. Could be very much a disaster, and people are bringing this up. So, someone else here. The EU also trades with the rest of the world on far better terms with the UK. Again, very true. We had the best of both, but Farage, Johnson and Hans told lies to get Brexit over the line. We are now losing over £40 billion plus annum, and Brexiteers would prefer to avoid discussing this at any cost. Again, what a surprise. Let's have a look. Yeah, this is it. So there's another one here. So Hannan now talks with the threat of Chinese revanchism, but What was the typical Brexiteer view, of course, in 2016? Remember all those sleight of hand, irrelevant economic arguments about the decline of EU share of global trade? God forbid. Which, of course, was mainly an inevitability statistic as a result of the phenomenal rise of the Chinese economy over the approximate same 30-year period. And how much of that Pacific Partnership growth is indeed directed to result of the Chinese demand? Probably quite a bit, since Japan, as the largest economy, hasn't even obviously grown since the 1990s. Australia's new wealth is obviously mainly due to the Chinese demand for that iron and coal. And while Chile at least produces 30% of the global copper output, again, crucially supported by the Chinese demand, shouldn't, of course, we be listening to more of the demands of the business and industry? I would particularly be interested to hear of any small and medium sized exporters now looking towards the Pacific Partnership to replace their damaged European trade, or at least modern conservatives. Or do modern conservatives now take the view that businesses need to be told what is in their best view by the ideological dreamers like Fox and Hannan? Someone else points out here, what is the point of a free trade deal like NAFTA or the UMCC if Trump can just impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, whereas smaller economies like Canada and Mexico just have to abide by the trade deal? Again, good point there. Yeah. The mildly inebriated musings of Disraeli on one relaxed evening about 1,000 years ago forms the very bedrock of Mr. Hannan's utopia. Not much else actually does, especially not the irksome thing which is called reality, which daily reminds us of how much we have now lost to hubris and fantasy. So Daniel Land says the implications in economic and strategic are huge. The implications for a very distant future. They did not put that on the side of the bus. The target audience of the nationalists and the Gullibists might have then noticed. Daniel Hannan said, I expect a bilateral US free trade deal is the only now deal in town. Which this commentator replied, the last time Trump was in, the UK was humiliated by him by this very notion. Where is, of course, that trade deal? And he finishes off, harking back to, of course, the days of empire. Trying to rely on Trump is the thinnest of gruels. For many Brexit enthusiasts, their remaining days will be spent trying to save face in ever more fanciful ways, trying to excite over ever crappier trade deals that they may or even may not exist. Someone else replies, to Daniel Hannan when he said, Europhile commentators may have played down the story because they cannot admit that anything good has come out of Brexit. To which this guy responded, well, I cut off my leg last week, but this week I found that I can now only buy shoes individually. My wife will, of course, never admit that anything good has come out of my mutilation, though. As, of course, the great Father Ted once explained about cows, they are not small, they're just a long way away. Businesses and products export things that they can deal, of course, with customers a long way away more easily than they can with businesses, say, 20 miles away. Businesses can, of course, now compete with businesses whose labor costs are just cost a fraction of that with the UK's more easily. And for what? A pimple on the backside now of our GDP. And a trade deal with Trump in the US, Trump is not known as a trustworthy dealer, both in his personal capacity and his presidential one. These people that he's appointed to his cabinets will see only one thing from the UK, and it isn't, of course, to make the UK richer. This is now the fruition of your dream, to make the UK a complete ATM for the US. Someone else said Daniel Hannan misled the British public, telling them that Brexit did not mean leaving the single market and single market again, which I brought up at the beginning. It was the most important referendum ever to take place in the UK, and Hannan was a very influential position when he should have told the truth about Brexit and the EU, but instead he chose to lie. Brexit is now costing the UK 40 to 50 billion pounds per annum, or at least 4 to 5% of GDP. That is why the UK is now broke and desperate. The Pacific Partnership will only add 0.08% to the GDP by 2030. You've had to be mad to trust Hannan on anything. Rejoining the single market and customs union is now critical unless you want to be Trump's 51st state and see the NHS destroyed, as Hannan wants. Yep. Very, very true. Um, Yep. Someone else says, yeah, Disraeli like to observe Britain was much an Asian as a European power. One reason why another that CP members were key to get us in after the US withdrew its applications. No one a nuclear power, the novel global reach, which they respond to. This sort of statement is, of course, by the Brits for the Brits and strictly for domestic consumption. This is not a military alliance. No one believes it to be so. Um, Yep, someone else says. In the end, the delusion is now so silly it is amusing. Saying Disraeli like to observe that Britain was much an Asian as a European power. Again, he continues that quote. The idea that think Malaysia, any of us think of us as an Asian power or want us to be, is absurd. We are an army of 74,000, for goodness sake. In just 15 years, we left Singapore and incidentally Australia to itself. We left India and then Suez, where ultimately the US told us and France, it's over for your empires. So it's just absurd to see the UK now as an Asian power any more, of course, than Peru, which Danan knows very well is a European one. This does not mean that we should not seek trade with them. And what's really thing about Brexit is now the deluded view of what we are. We are a European power with global reach, but it goes further. And of course, it requires you to believe that we are a free trade. Requires to believe that we are free trade believers with our core policy that has to make free trade less than 43% now of our trade. It requires you to complain that the single market was nothing, of course, about services. While it certainly could be more, do more on services, it was the most service-friendly trade area there is. Again, very true. Remember, our economy based on services. No banker is going to be thanking Daniel Hannan where they have to get up in the middle of the night to do business with the Pacific Partnership. Ultimately, while trying to gain the absolute minimum of at least $2 billion is to at least be welcomed, it does not make up for losing the 4% of GDP, leaving the single market and customs union. No amount of rhetoric, particularly when it is very silly, like Daniel Hannan's claim that we are an Asian power as much as a European one, ignores that number. Um, Someone else said, "Yeah, a global navy and an Asian power, blue water foreign policy, in the earliest 20th century. There is no end to Lord Hannan's soaring rhetoric. Without the empire, we have little to contribute east of the Suez, except now within the field of intelligence, of which we should at least still trade. But our navy, really, within the last 5 minutes, with a war with China. I suppose most of it would at least be safe at home, undertaking repairs. So at least that's good." Um, Yep, someone else points out on the 20th of August 2015, Daniel Hannan wrote on Conservative Home. The Lords are now being created faster than ever. Only China's National People's Congress is now more numerous. While even now, some high minded people are getting through, many peerages are going to, quote, time saving quangocrats who have built their careers on nothing, on nodding sagely while others speak, whose intricative solution is now to spend public money. After 21 years as a member of the European Parliament on the 1st of February, the Right Honourable Lord Hannan of Kilgrave assumed office. Nice work, of course, if you can get it. Someone else points out the Pacific Partnership is a trade bloc which we entered without a referendum, providing a very handy precedent for the future. Again, very true. Hey, if we want to join a trade bloc, well, there's the single market and customs union there. After all, if we join that, that's just a trade bloc after all. Don't need a referendum to do that, do we? And after all, they have provided us with a very interesting precedent on that. It will, of course, serve as a very useful stopgap until we join the EU. And if it does grow the economy by 0.6% over the next 15 years, then it is better than a kick in the teeth. Again, very, very true. Very, very true on that. Yeah, so this has been a bit of a long one, but hey, when it's the comedy stylings of Daniel Hannan, how can we resist? How, of course, can we resist on that? But do let me know what you think of Daniel Hannan's, quite frankly, nonsense in that. Because I think he even lied there about the secret courts not mentioning that and what that would do to our standards, and of course, not having to accept, products of the lowest standard. Well, we do until one of those companies decides to sue us, and then we have to lower our standards to accept their stuff. Yeah. Um, what do you think the British public's reaction is going to be to that? Because remember, you guys made a whole thing about not, you know, subverting ourselves to foreign courts. Well, that is, you know, a foreign court telling us we have to lower our standards. That hasn't been through Parliament like all the EU regulations did. Gee, wonder how the British public is going to react to that. So, as always, thank you for letting me exquisite on Daniel Hannan's fantastic comedy piece as always. Thank you very much for everyone joining me. Thank you very much if you stay for the whole thing. If you watch it in fits and spurts, that's fine. If you're watching this while doing the ironing, happy ironing. And of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. Remember to click the like and share button on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.